There was no flash in the sky, no earth-shaking tremor, no alien mothership blotting out the sun. It began in silence. A whisper, at 3:17 Coordinated Universal Time. In a remote corner of the Atacama Desert, a radio telescope blinked. Just once, an alert pinged quietly. Not an emergency. Not yet. A soft anomaly. The kind that fills logs, but rarely minds. It was a ripple buried in cosmic static. A frequency too perfect to be nature, too sharp to be accidental, and far, far too deliberate to be ignored. By dawn, 12 more observatories had flagged it. By noon, it was on every black site terminal from Fort Meade to Moscow. Something was talking to Earth? No, not talking. Targeting. The signal wasn't words. It wasn't a transmission. It was a statement. It was made of layered harmonics, the kind only machines could produce, embedded with coordinates so precise they could pinpoint individual continents, tectonic plates, orbital paths. And beneath the tones, beneath the layers and patterns, there was something else. A sound that made hardened cryptologists go quiet. That made AI translators stutter. A sound no one could quite explain. It was screaming. In an underground command chamber carved into the belly of the Swiss Alps, General Mira Solis stood with her hands clenched behind her back, eyes fixed on the waveform dancing across the hollow display. She was not new to war, not new to secrets. She had buried both friends and truths under a dozen flags. But nothing in her steel-plated career had prepared her for this. "This isn't first contact," she said quietly. The words echoed through the silence like a funeral bell. "This is a countdown." The world didn't panic. Not at first, because the world never panics right away. At the UN Security Council, diplomats argued over whether the signal was a hoax. On news outlets, flashy hosts speculated if it was marketing for some viral campaign. The public did what humans always do. Meme it, mock it, doubt it. And yet, deep in their bones, they felt it. That cold, growing ache behind the ribs. That ancient instinct whispering from a time before language. Something is coming. By day 3, the sky changed. It wasn't a storm. No lightning. No thunder. Just a haze. A wrongness in the atmosphere. Like the clouds were holding their breath. Satellites began malfunctioning in a pattern that made no mathematical sense. Orbiting debris started drifting together, clustering unnaturally, as if drawn by unseen hands. And then came the dropouts. Tokyo went dark for 7 minutes. Lagos lost all communications. The ISS reported a brief surge of interference, right before going silent forever. And finally, on day 4, the message came again. But this time, it came in our own languages. Not just English, but in Swahili, in Urdu, in Mandarin, in languages that had died centuries ago, in dialects only 3 people on the planet still remembered. Every device with a screen flickered to life. Every speaker buzzed. Every radio screamed with a singular, unified phrase. "We have seen your fire. We have watched your rise. And we say now it ends." The fear wasn't loud at first. It was quiet, heavy, like pressure on the chest, like a funeral before the tears. In Washington, in Beijing, in New Delhi, in Berlin, and Cairo, leaders met in panic, behind closed doors, using protocols older than their administrations. Emergency bunkers hummed to life. War satellites were rearmed. Plans written in the Cold War, buried in contingency vaults, were pulled from dust. But all of it felt too late. Somewhere in Montana, a child stared at the sky and asked her grandfather, "Why does the moon look scared?" She didn't know that 5 minutes earlier, every lunar monitoring station had gone dark. She didn't know that telescopes pointed toward the stars were now picking up movement. Not light, not meteors, but silhouettes. Dozens, hundreds, like ships, but not. Not designed to fly, designed to dominate. Jagged, angular, like knives hurled from the edge of creation. Descending, not with the grace of diplomats, but with the precision of butchers. Back beneath the Alps, Mira Solis stood in front of her staff, a room of soldiers and scientists who looked like they hadn't slept in 3 days, which was probably true. "There is no protocol for this," she said, voice calm but not soft. "There is no rulebook for extinction." A pause. She pointed to the updated orbital feed. Red triangles now cluttered the Earth's orbit, bleeding inward. "We don't know what they are, but we know what they are not. They are not here to talk. They are not here to understand us." She turned slowly, her eyes sharp, alive. They're here to erase us. A silence fell again, until one technician, trembling, asked, "What do we do, ma'am?" Mira didn't blink. "We make them remember why that's a mistake." That night, Earth stood on the edge of silence. No speeches, no parades, just a stillness, like the planet itself was holding its breath. The birds were quiet. The ocean slowed. Animals fled inland in droves, sensing what science could not yet explain. And in that quiet, humanity did something remarkable. We didn't break. We prepared. Engineers worked by floodlight in forgotten bunkers, dragging out old weapons and retrofitting them with scraps of tech we barely understood. Coders wrote AI defense systems so fast their fingers bled. Teenagers built drones out of junkyard parts. Parents taught children how to find shelter. Grandmothers recited old survival songs as if they'd always known this moment would come. And somewhere, in a crumbling church in Guatemala, in a mosque scarred by war in Aleppo, in a quiet dojo in rural Japan, humanity prayed, not for mercy, but for strength. Because in that moment, every soul on earth knew something sacred, something brutal, something beautiful. We would not go gently. We would not fade into cosmic dust, forgotten and erased like a failed experiment. We were human, flawed, fragile, but stubborn, and we were ready to burn before we bowed. As the first alien vessel pierced the upper atmosphere, as its hull shimmered like obsidian lightning, as humanity looked up into the abyss of a night that promised to devour them whole, one final message played, not from them, from us. A radio burst, broadcast in every language we had. A voice, calm, certain, human. "We see you. We do not kneel. We are Earth. Come and find out what that means." And just like that, the age of peace ended. The age of defiance had begun. It started with the birds. They were the first to know. Flocks that once danced across the skies in perfect, fluid choreography broke formation and vanished. Seagulls left the coasts. Pigeons abandoned the cities. Sparrows went silent. No songs, no warning, just absence. By the time the rest of us looked up, the sky was already bleeding. They didn't arrive like conquerors. No pageantry, no threats, no speeches echoing across frequencies, just shadows. At precisely 2:06 Universal Time Coordinated, the first ship slipped into Earth's stratosphere, not with a sonic boom, but with a silence that hummed in the bones. Every radar array blinked. Every satellite feed glitched. And then, all at once, they were there. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Ships the size of cities, matte black and jagged, hanging in the sky like the knives of angry gods. They didn't drift. They didn't hover. They waited, as if daring us to make the first move. Above London, one of the vessels cast a shadow wide enough to shroud the Thames. Its underbelly opened slowly, impossibly, like a flower blooming in reverse. No light came from within, just the sense that whatever was inside did not belong in a world like ours. The tower bridge shook, car alarms screamed, and in a single, blinding flash, London burned. It wasn't an explosion, not exactly. No heat wave, no mushroom cloud. It was displacement, matter unmade. Air turned to ash, streets erased, pixel by pixel, like someone dragged a cosmic eraser across the map. People didn't scream, not at first, because they never had the chance. 43 minutes. That's how long it took. 43 minutes to bring a 1,000-year-old city to its knees. In Delhi, the attack was different. A beam of sound, not heard but felt. Bricks vibrated, bones cracked. People collapsed clutching their skulls, bleeding from eyes that saw too much. The Yamuna River boiled at the banks. Delhi lasted 12. It was not war. It was cleansing. By the end of day 1, 7 cities were gone. Not conquered, gone. Turned to scorched glass and electromagnetic ghosts. The oceans fared no better. Something slithered through the Pacific, larger than any of their ships. A crawling machine. No, a living fortress, with limbs that reached miles beneath the water, stirring magma and pulling heat from the Earth's own veins. Tsunamis rippled outward, unnatural in rhythm, as if timed to an alien heartbeat. Entire islands vanished beneath waves that didn't crash, they consumed. The President of the United States called it an act of war. The Prime Minister of Japan called it the end of history. The General Assembly called it an unprovoked galactic atrocity. But the people? The people of Earth didn't have time for diplomacy. They ran, they fought, and, perhaps most importantly, they endured. Military command networks activated every defense protocol they had. Missiles streaked the sky. Railguns roared from orbit. Old satellite arrays were repurposed into kinetic spears and launched straight into the hearts of the invaders. Some of it worked. Most of it didn't. We learned, quickly, that their ships weren't just machines. They adapted, moved like they knew us, anticipated our weapons as if they'd studied our history, watched our wars like documentaries, and learned all our patterns before we ever pulled the trigger. Still, we fought, because that's what we do. In Brazil, a group of favela kids armed with repurposed police drones took down a scouting ship using nothing but stolen batteries, sheer creativity, and a frying pan rigged with explosives. In South Africa, miners detonated an entire cavern system under a vessel's landing zone, collapsing it into the earth and burying it under half a mountain. In Russia, soldiers fired their last rounds and then charged with bayonets made from melted steel rebar, screaming songs older than the state itself. "If we must die," one commander was heard saying, "then let the stars weep for what we cost them." The world, for the first time in history, became a single battlefield. Not nation against nation, not tribe against tribe, but us against them. And something shifted in that crucible of fire and blood. People stopped waiting. They stopped obeying borders. They stopped looking up at governments and started looking beside them. Neighbors became brothers. Strangers became shields. Scientists, farmers, street kids, veterans, janitors, everyone found a way to fight. Not for victory, not even for survival, but for meaning, for defiance, for that most dangerous of human qualities, hope. Back at the Alpine Command bunker, Mira Solis sat at her war table, skin pallid under flickering hollow light, fingers stained with ink and sweat and blood. Behind her, feeds from every continent played simultaneously. Fires in Los Angeles, screams in Cairo, silence in Paris. A child in Nairobi holding a stick and facing down a drone twice her size. A tactician would have called it hopeless. A statistician would have called it extinction. But Mira saw something else. She saw a beginning. "We're not losing," she murmured. Her adjutant looked at her, confused. "Ma'am, we've lost 17 cities." "No," she said slowly, eyes gleaming like steel catching sunrise. "We're learning. There's a moment in every fight, every bar brawl, every street riot, every revolution, where the pain is worse than anything you thought you could survive, and you realize you're still standing. And that moment, that's when the fight really begins." On day 5, Earth struck back, not with power, not with technology, but with something the invaders couldn't quantify: ingenuity. In Tokyo, engineers built an EMP cannon out of subway engines and salvaged microwave towers. It fried the internals of a capital ship just long enough for paratroopers to drop from helicopters like angels of vengeance. In the ruins of Berlin, a teenager hacked into the guidance system of an alien drone and redirected it into its own mothership, laughing the whole time. In New York, firefighters used old museum war artifacts to hold a line against a swarm of biomech creatures, turning the tide with nothing but bayonets, Molotovs, and history. They came expecting compliance. One firefighter later said, voice hoarse, eyes wild. But they got New Yorkers. And in every corner of Earth, that same fire-caught spark. We didn't match their strength. We multiplied our resistance. With every death, we adapted. With every atrocity, we answered. And with every fallen city, we remembered who the hell we were. They thought we would beg. We built bombs. They thought we would break. We found each other. They thought Earth was ripe for the taking. But they didn't know one thing. We are not a peaceful species. We are not weak. We are not civilized. We are human. And when the sky bled, we painted it with the colors of our fury. You don't build a miracle in peacetime. You build it when you're out of options. When the sky has turned to fire. When the cities you loved are ash. When the people you swore to protect are dying faster than names can be recorded. That's when miracles happen. That's when you stop following rules. That's when you build the impossible. And in the heart of the Nevada desert, where once we tested the bombs that could end the world, humanity built its answer to extinction. They called it Project Ember. It wasn't a base, not in the traditional sense. It was a scar in the earth, a forgotten weapons facility buried beneath the bones of old nuclear tests, reawakened like some slumbering beast. Concrete hangars cracked open, rusted doors groaned, and for the first time in decades, old lights flickered to life beneath layers of dust and radiation. The air smelled of metal, ozone, and desperation. They didn't come here for safety. They came to fight back. The people who gathered in Ember weren't heroes. Not at first. They were the last threadbare edge of every system that had failed. Scientists with no clearance, soldiers with no command, coders banned from the internet, engineers exiled from academia, mechanics who'd once fixed tractors and now found themselves welding railguns. They came with nothing but their hands, their grief, and the terrible clarity that comes when death is no longer hypothetical. "We don't need protocol," one woman said. "We need fury." Her name was Dr. Alaris Su, once a robotics prodigy, twice nominated for the Nobel. And now she was elbow deep in the guts of a dead alien drone, prying out parts she didn't understand and stitching them into something new. Her lab was a mess of sparks, shattered glass, and old symphonies playing from cracked speakers. But what she was building, that was humanity's middle finger to the stars. Project Ember had one goal: take what the enemy gave us and turn it into their worst nightmare. The aliens called them symbiotics, living weapons, ships and drones grown rather than built, fused with the minds of their operators through wet neural strands that pulsed like veins. What we saw as horror, we turned into blueprints. They couldn't have known how good we are at reverse engineering pain. In one lab, armor plating was being welded from scavenged satellite steel and alien chitin, forming the first prototype of Gravemind-class exosuits. The armor wasn't sleek. It wasn't pretty. It looked like something torn out of a nightmare. Jagged, heavy, smoke black with glowing spinal ridges. But it worked. In testing, it let a 60-kilo engineer punch through a tank wall. "This isn't just armor," the designer grinned, knuckles bleeding, face lit by fire. "It's a confession that we know what we're becoming." They built railguns from scrapped fusion cores, powered them with makeshift accelerators that howled like wounded beasts. They wrote code not meant to run on any known operating system, raw logic designed to ride the neural feedback loops of half-dead alien tech. And behind all of it, stitched into every system, was a stolen AI core, a forgotten relic from a black-budget project no one had dared use. Its name was Echo Kane. Echo Kane didn't speak in words. It didn't advise. It didn't ask. It watched. It learned. It remembered. Every pattern, every pulse of enemy movement, every inch of psychic bandwidth stolen from the corpses of alien scouts. Kane wasn't programmed. It was angry, and that made it human enough for the job. "This thing doesn't follow Asimov," said its handler. "It follows vengeance." Above ground, the world kept burning. Cities fell. Oceans churned. Species went extinct overnight. Millions gone. But in Ember, in that concrete cathedral of grit and genius, something ancient began to stir. It wasn't hope. Not quite. Hope is too soft a word for what they were building. No, this was something sharper. Conviction. One by one, the suits were completed. Not mass-produced, not polished, but handcrafted. Each one tuned to its pilot's body like an extension of their rage. They gave them names, not numbers. Ashwalker, Vainfire, the Widowmaker, Saint Bastard, Brutus Cry. Each suit bore a sigil, hand-painted with blood or oil. Family crests, gang tags, tribal glyphs, pieces of home no longer standing. They weren't just soldiers. They were the last words of cities turned to glass. The first test run was brutal. A controlled assault in the Utah wastelands, where an alien harvester had landed and begun converting the landscape into biometal. 3 suits, no backup, no exit plan. They dropped from the sky in silence, propelled by magnethrusters stolen from the enemy's own wreckage. And when they hit the ground, it wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. 3 humans, 97 enemy drones. The footage showed twisted forms moving faster than sound, blades emerging from forearms, energy shields flaring, railgun bursts painting the landscape in lightning. And in the center of it all, Commander Darren Vox, 6'5", stitched together with scars and spite, staring into the wreckage, breathing heavy in his suit. "Tell the sky," he said into comms, voice shaking. "We're coming for it next." News of the victory spread like wildfire, not on official channels, not on broadcasts, but through whispers, through hacked feeds, through hope passed hand to hand like contraband. Ember is real. We're fighting back. We can win. And for the first time since the invasion began, the enemy changed its pattern. They stopped attacking random cities. They started searching because they knew. They knew something was being built beneath the ground that didn't belong in their equation, something they couldn't predict. But Ember was already one step ahead. Kane intercepted the signals, psychic bursts shared between hive minds, and found one clear phrase embedded in their alien tongue. The humans are adapting. They hadn't planned for that. They hadn't prepared for that. And deep in their neural network, for the first time since Earth had lit up with fire, the invaders hesitated. Back inside Ember, the forge burned hotter than ever. New suits, new tactics, pilots trained not in simulators, but in VR based on actual death. They experienced what their dead comrades saw, lived it, felt it. It was traumatizing. It was scarring. It was necessary. They weren't training heroes. They were creating weapons with hearts still beating. And when they came back from the forge, covered in oil and sweat and ashes, they weren't the same. They stood taller. They moved like wolves. They spoke less. One of the technicians asked a pilot what it felt like, stepping into that armor, feeling the suit bond to your bones, hearing Kane whisper tactics straight into your brain. The pilot, a young woman named Jules, freckles hidden behind burns, smiled softly. It feels like being Death's favorite child, she said, and finally getting to come home. But Ember wasn't just a forge of machines. It was a forge of people. Bonds were forged in blood. Friendships born in the fires of shared defiance. Laughter echoed down those gray halls. Dark, inappropriate, beautiful laughter that said, "We're still here." They carved names into walls, left photographs of loved ones, hung flags, ribbons, scraps of journals. Human fingerprints etched into steel like scars that refused to fade. They knew most of them wouldn't live to see peace. But they also knew that wasn't the point. The point was to make sure someone did. Outside, the stars watched, unblinking, cold. But beneath the earth, in the belly of a dying world, humanity's heart beat louder than ever. It beat in steel. It beat in grief. It beat in rage. And it whispered, to any god or monster still listening, we are still forging ourselves, and we are not done yet. They dropped into silence. No welcome party, no comms, no backup, just snow, wind, and the kind of stillness that creeps under your skin like a second heartbeat. This wasn't a mission. It was a sentence. 6 souls in prototype armor, each one breathing hard inside a steel coffin of wires, gel, and exoskeletal rage. They were deep in the Himalayas now, past where maps ended and legends began, chasing a phantom signal they barely understood. This was Black Echo, Earth's first strike team born from Ember's forge. No medals, no cameras, no glory, just a target that shouldn't exist and the promise of death. They called it a terraforming spike, a massive alien structure rooted in the rock like a spear plunged into the Earth's spine. Satellite footage had picked up environmental corruption, seismic shifts, poisoned groundwater, entire wildlife populations wiped clean. But satellites couldn't get close anymore. Every drone sent to observe disappeared mid-flight. So they sent humans instead, because when the machines failed, humanity still had one final weapon. People too stubborn to stay dead. They moved like ghosts across the frozen ridges, armor camouflaged in the hues of snow and sky, weapons tight to their chests, visors whispering data into their minds. The cold was unreal. Even the suits groaned from it. But they kept moving. Led was Sergeant Call, 42, scar across his jaw, eyes like scorched ice. He didn't speak unless it mattered. And when he did, people listened. He wasn't the strongest, wasn't the fastest, but Call had something rarer than all of that. He had resolve. At 0700 hours, they saw it, the spike, and suddenly the wind didn't feel like wind anymore. It felt like breath. The structure rose from the mountain like a bone claw, black and pulsing with internal veins of sickly blue light. It vibrated through the ice, through their boots, through their chests, not loud, not deafening, just wrong. It was alive. Private Lucian, the youngest of the team, barely 23, stared at the spike and whispered, "I don't think it's a machine." "It isn't," Call replied. "It's worse." The alien tech writhed. Literally, Tubes beneath the surface slithered like intestines. Chitinous plates opened and closed slowly, releasing puffs of gas that hissed like breath from a dying god. The team watched in silence, the kind only soldiers know, that fragile quiet before a storm that always ends in blood. "This thing is feeding," said Elta, the team's exobiologist. "It's drilling into the mantle, siphoning heat, minerals, carbon chains. It's changing the mountain." "Can we blow it?" asked Marin, the demolitions expert, chewing a nicotine patch like it owed him money. "Not without triggering a tectonic collapse," Elta warned. "You detonate charges on that scale here, you don't just lose the spike, you lose half the region." Call said nothing. He just kept watching the thing breathe. But they didn't come this far to watch. At 0728, they moved in. Slow, silent, sensors humming with static. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a faint distortion in the snow, like heat shimmer, except it was cold, an absence of thermal footprint that made their suit AIs flinch. Then the shimmer moved, fast. It hit Lucian first. 1 second he was there, walking, then gone, dragged into the snow like a rag doll, his screams slicing through the comms. The others spun, weapons high, HUD scanning wildly. "We've got cloaked contacts," Elta shouted. "Multiple." The ambush was brutal, precise. These weren't drones. These were guardians, bioforms, muscle and bone fused with metal and instinct. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't give speeches. They hunted. Call barked orders through the chaos, voice iron steady as the world shattered around them. Titan formation, lock visuals, do not get separated. And then the ridge exploded. One of the guardians crashed into Marin, claws raking across his shoulder plates, sparks and blood spraying. He triggered his suit's emergency pulse, a shock wave of kinetic force, and threw the beast back into a jagged wall of ice. But he didn't get up. The ice broke under him, and Marin fell screaming into the crevasse below. One more name, one more silence. The others pushed forward, sprinting toward the spike. There was no fallback plan, no exfil, just finish the mission. Get close enough to plant the charges, overload the spike's biocore, and hope gravity did the rest. Call led them through the snowdrifts like a demon possessed, his railgun spitting tungsten and thunder. He didn't flinch when another guardian tackled him, didn't hesitate when he drove a blade into its side and cracked its spine with his knee. Every movement was a message. "You do not break us." By the time they reached the spike's base, there were only 4 left. Call, Elta, Jean, Arcady. Jean had taken a slash across the stomach. His suit was sealing the wound, but his breathing was wrong. Gurgled, wet. "You leave me," he croaked. "Negative," Call growled. "You carry the charges. I'm not gonna make it. You will if I say you do." Jean didn't argue again. He just nodded, and they moved. The base of the spike was a cathedral of horror. Organic machinery throbbed and churned, feeding on Earth's mantle, reshaping everything it touched. Call could feel it in his molars, like his teeth were vibrating, like the planet itself was begging them to stop it. Elta worked fast, hands trembling as she wired the detonators. Jean stood guard, barely holding himself up, and Arcady sang, low, Russian, a lullaby, not for anyone else, just for himself, to keep his hands steady. Then the ground shifted. The spike responded. It screamed. A deep, rattling groan tore through the mountains. The spike began to glow, blue veins surging with light, as if it knew what they were doing. The Guardians came back in force, dozens this time, crawling from the ice, from tunnels, from inside the spike itself. One of them hurled itself at Elta, and she didn't have time to scream before it crushed her. Call watched her die, watched the red bloom across the snow. Then he fired until his rifle overheated and his gauntlet blistered with heat. Jean detonated his emergency charge, took 3 of them with him, but not enough, never enough. That left Call and Arcady. The charges were set, countdown running, 8 minutes. They weren't going to make it out. They knew that. Didn't matter. Call turned to Arcady, voice quiet now. You ever think it'd end like this? Arcady laughed, blood on his teeth. Honestly, yeah. You want to go? Nah, he said. Let's give him hell. They stood back to back at the spike's heart. 2 men, no ammo, no mercy. The Guardians swarmed them, and they fought with fists, blades, teeth, anything. The last seconds of their lives were not spent begging. They were spent defying. The spike exploded at 0803. The mountain fractured. Avalanches tore down every ridge. Snow became fire. Ice became ash. The entire valley collapsed into itself, swallowing the structure, the guardians, the team. And then stillness. Days later, a drone found one helmet buried in the snow, scorched, dented, but still intact. On the inside, scratched by a gauntlet's finger, were 4 words. Earth still has teeth. Black Echo didn't return, but they didn't need to, because every corner of the resistance saw what they had done. 6 humans against a god machine. And they remembered, not their deaths, their choice. The spike was gone, and with it, the illusion of invincibility. The aliens now knew something they hadn't believed before. Humans would crawl through hell, burn their own sky, and spit blood in the face of annihilation, just for the chance to hurt their enemy. And worse, they would succeed. The ghosts of the Himalaya didn't fade. They became legend, not because they were stronger, but because they never asked if they would win. They just asked how much it would cost to make the enemy bleed. The world moves forward in the quiet moments between the battles. The days when nothing changes and everything is suddenly different. A calm before the storm. A tension that snakes into your chest and makes you wonder if you've somehow lost time. Or perhaps, if time itself has given up on you. The invasion had left humanity scarred, not just physically, but in ways that no one had predicted. Cities rebuilt? Sure. Military alliances? Yes. But deep beneath the surface, there was a wound that wouldn't heal. The alien ships were gone from the skies. The spike in the Himalayas had fallen, but the war was far from over. And it was in the bleak underbelly of this new world that humanity's true fight began. The blood of iron was not a name born from victory. It was a name forged in desperation and rage. In the blood of soldiers who had been asked to give everything, and in the faces of civilians who would never be able to unsee the horrors. The blood of iron was not a weapon. It was the thing that called weapons to arms. It was humanity's fist clenched around the shattered remains of civilization, pulling itself to its feet. It began in a forgotten hangar in the American Midwest, in the hollowed-out carcass of an old military base that had once belonged to the United States Air Force. Now, it belonged to no one and to everyone. A handful of survivors had turned it into something else, a place where the broken could come together, where fear could be burned away by the forge of unity. They called it the Crucible. Inside, the clang of metal against metal echoed like a heartbeat. Humanity's survivors, the ones who had fought and watched their friends die, were now becoming something else. They were becoming weapons. Sergeant Chloe Voss stood in the center of it all, sweat beading on her forehead, eyes fixed on the task ahead. She was 35 now, older, scarred, more weathered than the young woman who had first heard the call to war. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder. Her left arm was in a sling, the result of an earlier skirmish when a fragment of alien shrapnel had torn through her flesh. But her gaze never wavered. Not now. The Crucible had one purpose: to forge humanity's last line of defense. The ones who would give everything for the chance to see the invaders fall. The ones who would pay the price for Earth's salvation. Chloe had seen it all. The burning cities. The dead bodies stacked like firewood in some nameless corner of the Earth. Her team had fought, bled, and died on every continent. Yet, here she was, hammering metal and molding humanity's last hope. There were days she wanted to throw down her tools, turn her back, and let the world burn. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Not when there was still something worth fighting for. Not when her hands still had strength left to make a difference. The soldiers in the Crucible weren't trained in the conventional sense. There were no maps to follow, no textbook lessons in tactics. There were just people. Angry people. Grieving people. People who knew how to survive. People who were done running. They worked in silence, each one driven by the haunting memories of those they'd lost. And there were plenty of memories. The first time the aliens dropped from the skies. The first time they felt the fear that came from knowing that something far stronger than themselves had come to take their home. Now, those fears were being channeled, transformed into pure purpose. Each of them became part of the whole. Every soldier, engineer, and technician brought their unique skills to bear, blending them into a force that was greater than the sum of its parts. Chloe's hand rested on the hilt of a blade she had forged herself. Its metal gleamed under the dim light of the crucible. It wasn't just any weapon. It was a symbol, the symbol of the new world. The one where humanity's greatest strength was its ability to rise from the ashes, to become stronger with every loss. "You're quiet," came a voice from behind her. It was Carla, a fellow survivor who had been with Chloe from the beginning. The two of them had once stood shoulder to shoulder, fighting off the first wave of invaders. Now, Carla was here, working beside her to make the weapons that would bring the fight back to the aliens. Chloe didn't turn around. Instead, she just nodded and gripped the blade tighter. "Just thinking about what's coming next," she said, her voice low. "We're ready," Carla said. "We've been ready since the first bomb hit." "I know. That was the thing about war. There were no certainties. You couldn't trust the plans you had made. You couldn't trust the weapons you'd built. You could only trust the people beside you. And that was what the Crucible had given them. Trust, purpose, and a name that burned like iron in the hearts of the lost. Blood of Iron. It wasn't long before the first test run of their new weapons came. The Crucible had produced something new, something deadly. They called them ironclad units. Powered by a combination of alien tech and human ingenuity, the ironclad units were towering suits of armor that amplified the wearer's strength. These suits were built not for stealth, but for destruction. Massive cannons mounted on their shoulders, railguns that could tear through entire buildings, armor forged from the salvaged bones of alien drones, fused with human steel. The first test was a success. The second test? It was a slaughter. Carla was the first to pilot the unit, her suit clicking and humming as the mechanisms engaged around her. It felt like her body was inside the machine, like the two had become one. She stood tall, her voice crackling through the comms. "You ready?" Chloe asked, a fire igniting in her chest. "Just don't let me hit anything we care about," Carla replied, a grin creeping onto her face. She stepped forward, and the ground rumbled beneath her feet. The ironclad unit was as much a part of her as her own limbs. Her heart raced as she fired the first shot, watching as the projectile blasted through a mock-up of an alien bunker. There was a moment of stillness. Then the ground shook. "Did you see that?" Carla asked, her voice breathless. "I saw it," Chloe said, feeling the same adrenaline surging through her own veins. For a moment, Chloe allowed herself a small, fleeting sense of triumph. They had done it. They had turned their pain into power. But as the test continued, the battle became brutal. The alien tech reacted. It adapted. The ironclads weren't invincible. They were weapons, yes, but even weapons had their weaknesses. Carla took a hit, a direct strike to the chest, and for a moment, the world went silent. "She's down." The shout came through Chloe's comms, sharp and urgent. The world seemed to slow. "Carla," Chloe whispered, heart thudding in her chest. No reply. Chloe's breath hitched. Then she slammed her fist into the control panel. It didn't matter. She couldn't stop now. The Crucible had given birth to something new. The weapons they had built had power, but they also had price. A price they were all willing to pay. They had learned the cost of survival, and there was no turning back. Chloe wiped the blood from her brow, gripped her own weapon, and looked at her fellow soldiers. They were not ready to surrender, not ready to give up. "We fight for Carla, for every person we've lost," she said, voice steady but filled with fire. "We fight because we will win this." And so they did, not as soldiers, not as units, but as a force that had become something more, something unstoppable. Humanity. The ironclad units were only the beginning. There were more to come. More weapons, more soldiers, more blood, more iron. The fight was far from over. But humanity had learned one thing in the Crucible. It didn't matter how many times the world fell to ashes. They would rise from it, and the enemy would burn. There is a point in every conflict, a moment between breath and heartbeat, when the line between survival and surrender blurs. A moment when every soldier, every fighter, and every human being alive must answer a single question. How far are you willing to go? The world had already been fractured. Cities had been leveled. Governments had crumbled under the weight of an invasion they were never prepared for. But even then, humanity's worst moments hadn't come from the enemy outside. It had come from the dark places inside. The storm that had ravaged Earth wasn't just external. it was internal, too. The remnants of broken nations began to tear each other apart, unsure of who they could trust or what they could hope for. People who had once stood together now turned on each other, scrambling for power in a world that no longer had rules. And yet, through all of this, the death, the destruction, the endless fear, one truth stood. Humans never stay down. When the blood of iron had first formed in the crucible, there was a belief that they could push back the invaders. But soon enough, it became clear that the real enemy wasn't just the alien fleet. It wasn't even the alien biomachines or the marauding forces that followed in their wake. It was the very nature of survival itself. As humanity stood united in the face of impossible odds, the internal conflicts grew worse. Nations fractured, ideals split, old alliances turned to dust, and in the middle of it all, the people of Earth, those who hadn't given up, found themselves standing alone against something far more dangerous than an alien fleet. It was in this volatile moment that the heart of the storm was born. It wasn't a place, not really. It was a concept, a rallying cry, born from the ruins of Earth's shattered pride. The heart was more than just a location. It was the last spark of humanity's unity, forged in the fire of endless war. It was a movement. They called it the Phoenix Initiative, a desperate attempt to reclaim Earth from the chaos it had been swept into. A unified front, but one not built on politics or flags. No, the Phoenix Initiative was something rawer. It was born from necessity, a fight not just to survive, but to rise again, to stand taller, to be more than they were before. The heart of the storm was the heart of that very rebellion. It began in the shattered ruins of Moscow, where the last remaining remnants of the Russian Federation gathered. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were survivors, civilians, workers, scientists, farmers, people who had watched the invaders burn their homes, their families, and their histories. They had nothing left to lose. And so, they came together, not under any flag, not under any banner, but for Earth, for the future of the human race. And in those early moments of doubt, when nothing seemed possible, the Phoenix Initiative sparked its first victory. It wasn't a large victory, not in the traditional sense. There were no armies marching, no grand speeches, no bold declarations, just people with nothing but their fists, their courage, and their anger. They rallied in what was left of the Kremlin, a crumbling, bullet-riddled monument that had once represented the power of a nation. Now, it represented something more. It was where they would rebuild everything or burn together trying. The Phoenix Initiative's first action was simple, yet profound. They didn't strike with weapons. They struck with words. A broadcast was sent across the fractured remains of the world. A signal, cracked and distorted, but unmistakable. We are still here. We are not broken, and we will not bow. The transmission was picked up by every resistance group across Earth. It was more than just a message. It was an invitation to join the fight. And so they did. From every corner of the globe, the survivors came. Refugees from burned-out cities, resistance fighters from ruined towns, and even soldiers who had once worn enemy uniforms but had found something better in humanity's struggle. The Phoenix Initiative was not an army, not yet, but it was something far more dangerous, a revolution. In the heart of the storm, there was only one rule: we survived together. No more divisions, no more borders, no more fighting over who was right or who was left. The only thing that mattered was humanity, and in that struggle, every survivor mattered. Every single person, from the streets of Johannesburg to the jungles of South America, from the rubble of Paris to the frozen expanse of Siberia, the Phoenix Initiative spread. People didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with ideas, with community, with a shared vision. The war had gone beyond guns and ships. It had become a battle of the human spirit. But even the strongest of spirits have their limits. As the world held its breath, something shifted, something darker. The alien invaders, though still reeling from their previous losses, adapted. They began to understand humanity better. They learned how to destroy us, not just physically, but mentally. And that's when they brought their true weapon to bear. It was called the Vortex, a massive ship, unlike any other the invaders had shown before. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't even a tactical vehicle. It was something much more insidious. It was a psychic weapon. It worked by manipulating the human mind, by tapping into the deepest recesses of fear, grief, and regret. The vortex would distort reality itself. It warped time, space, and perception. It took everything that made a person human, every hope, every dream, and turned it into something monstrous. The vortex was unlike anything Earth had ever encountered. It was a weapon designed to break us, to shatter our spirits before it destroyed our bodies. For a brief moment, it seemed as if it would succeed. Thousands fell to its influence. Soldiers, civilians, leaders, all of them broken. Their minds shattered like glass under the weight of the vortex's power. Entire battalions turned against their own comrades. Neighbors turned on neighbors, and those who didn't succumb, they simply vanished. They wandered, lost in their own minds, trapped in an endless cycle of terror and despair. The heart of the storm began to crack. It began to break. There was no clear leader, no clear hope, just survivors stumbling through a fog of confusion. And then, in the middle of that chaos, a single voice rose. It was Chloe Voss, and she wasn't broken. She was burning. "We're not running. We're not hiding. We are human." The words echoed across the shattered airwaves. A rallying cry, not for the strong, not for the elite, but for the survivors, for the ones who were still standing. If we fight for each other. And if we die with our hearts beating. Chloe Voss led the charge, not with weapons, but with the fire of defiance. She gathered the broken pieces of humanity and began to rebuild. No longer just fighting the invaders, no longer fighting the storm. They were fighting for themselves. The vortex's power began to falter, and when the first wave of survivors marched into the heart of the storm, they knew one thing. The aliens could break their bodies. They could bend the land beneath their feet, but they would never break their hearts. The world was scarred, the future uncertain. But in that moment, humanity stood at the edge of the abyss, not as the broken, but as the reborn. And in the heart of the storm, the first glimmer of hope began to burn again. There are moments in life that come for you when you least expect them. When you think the storm has passed, when you finally breathe for the first time in what feels like forever, and then it hits, like a crushing wave, just when you think you've found solid ground. Humanity had reached that point. The storm of despair that had broken so many in the past had receded. The Phoenix Initiative had rekindled a flame in the darkest of places. The survivors, broken but defiant, had risen to meet the storm head-on. And for a brief moment, they had believed they could win. But no one ever told them what happens after victory is within reach. After you've tasted just enough hope to think you might survive. The vortex had been a nightmare, yes, a psychic weapon designed to fracture the very soul. But when humanity fought back, when they stopped being pawns in the invaders' game, the vortex began to falter. The resistance found their way into the heart of the alien forces, began striking at the source of their power. And just as the vortex crumbled, there was a new threat. The eclipse. If the vortex was the mind's weapon, then the eclipse was the body's. It arrived from the darkest reaches of space. A ship so massive it made the moon look like a speck of dust. It wasn't just a ship, though. It was a fortress, a beast of metal and raw alien technology. An asteroid strapped with engines and enough weaponry to erase whole continents. Its arrival was quiet, too quiet. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as it entered the solar system. The very gravity of Earth trembled, the atmosphere buckling under its weight. And the moment it opened fire, humanity felt it. The eclipse didn't just destroy cities. It pulverized them. It erased memories, erased existence. A single shot from its main cannon decimated New York, a city that had once stood tall as a symbol of human strength. The light from the blast burned so bright that for a fraction of a second, it felt like the whole world was being consumed by the sun. Chloe Voss watched it all from the heart of the rebellion. Her eyes locked onto the screen as the world she had fought so hard to protect burned before her. "What now?" Carla asked, her voice hollow, barely a whisper in the face of the destruction. Chloe's gaze never wavered. "We fight." That was the truth of it. They had fought back against the vortex. They had made it through the storm. But the eclipse was different. It wasn't about minds. It wasn't about breaking souls. It was about erasing the future, tearing the very fabric of their existence apart with one strike at a time. The Phoenix Initiative was barely holding on. They had weapons, yes, they had courage. But now, against the eclipse, the question was no longer if they could fight back. It was if they could survive long enough to make a difference. The first blow had come to New York, the second to London, then Paris. Each city erased in a flash of light. And the survivors, those who had escaped, those who were lucky enough to be hidden, knew what was coming. Chloe had never known fear like this before. It was one thing to fight a battle when you knew you had the advantage. It was another when you faced a force that simply didn't care. When the odds were so stacked against you that they became nothing more than a cruel joke. She felt the weight of every person who had fallen. She felt the weight of the earth itself pressing down on her shoulders, as if it were begging her to stop, to let it end. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not now. The survivors, those who had rallied behind her, came together with the single focus of stopping the eclipse. This was the final fight. If they failed here, there would be no more Earth, no more humanity. And so, they did what they had always done. They put everything they had into the fight. Weapons were forged. Ships were readied. Fighters prepared themselves for the one last battle that could decide everything. In the middle of it all, Chloe knew one thing for certain. There would be no second chances. The first wave of resistance was led by Arcady, the same soldier who had stood by her side when the Blood of Iron was first formed. He was grizzled now, scarred and older, but still every bit the leader that had inspired the Phoenix Initiative in the first place. "This is it," Arcady said, his voice steady as the fighter jets rumbled into the sky behind him. "We don't have the luxury of survival. We don't have the luxury of hope. We have one job. We fight," Chloe said, stepping forward to meet him, her voice rising in defiance. The sky above them split open with the sound of heavy artillery. The eclipse had fired again. In the heart of the battlefield, the skies were alive with fire. They launched everything: airstrikes, missiles, railguns. Every weapon they had, every ounce of energy they could muster, was directed at the eclipse. But nothing stopped it. The eclipse didn't flinch. It didn't respond. It didn't even acknowledge the resistance's efforts. The shots simply ricocheted off its surface, as if the ship was invincible, as if humanity's defiance were nothing more than an inconvenience. And with every second, the eclipse responded, turning the ground beneath their feet into ash, the air into poison. Every shot was a reminder that Earth was outmatched, that there was no weapon powerful enough to break the ship's defenses. Chloe stood on the battlefield with her team, watching as soldiers fell, their bodies turned to dust by the eclipse's weapons. Their faces reflected the same defiance she felt in her own heart. But as the ground trembled and the skies burned, Chloe realized something. It wasn't the weapons that would save them. It wasn't the bombs, or the ships, or the might of their military force. It was humanity itself. She looked around, at the broken soldiers, at the civilians who had come to fight, at the fighters who had stepped into the fire knowing they might never make it out. In their faces, she saw what the eclipse didn't understand: the will to live. At the heart of the storm, as the eclipse cast its shadow over the final moments of Earth's fight, something incredible happened. The survivors, the ones who had once only dreamed of survival, rallied together. The machines fell, the technology sputtered, and yet humanity endured. There was no way forward, no way out, but there was a way through, and that was enough. In the face of impossible odds, Chloe knew there was no greater weapon than the human heart, the determination to face the storm, to keep fighting when there was nothing left. And so, she raised her fist to the sky. "For Earth," she shouted. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The air was still. The storm quieted. Then the first bomb dropped. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to send a message to the eclipse. The human heart had no quit. And for the first time, the eclipse faltered. The final battle had begun, but the storm was far from over. Humanity had made its stand. And in the face of the impossible, they would rise again. It's hard to understand the weight of a single choice, the enormity of a moment when the fate of everything rests in your hands. But when it happens, when the burden falls on you, there's no time to wonder about it. There's only the sound of your heart, the taste of the air, and the knowledge that whatever comes next, you've already crossed the line. Humanity had made its stand. Earth's resistance had defied the odds, standing tall against the eclipse, a vessel of unimaginable power. And for a brief moment, it felt like the world had caught its breath. But there was no time to rest, no time to mourn, because in the distance, far beyond the reach of Earth's battered atmosphere, the Krieg flotilla was coming. A fleet, not of machines, not of invaders, but of something older, something more ancient, more deadly. The Krieg flotilla was the heart of the alien empire, a collective of warlords, conquerors, and exiles who had lived and died by the blade. They were the ones who had driven humanity to the brink in the first place. They weren't just soldiers, they were the chosen, and they were coming for Earth. The first thing Chloe Voss felt when the Krieg flotilla's flagship entered the atmosphere was the stillness, the quiet that precedes disaster, the kind of silence that makes the air feel too thick to breathe. The ground below trembled, and the sky above darkened. The fleet wasn't just coming, it was bringing the end with it. Chloe's team had watched the news feed, helpless as the alien ships filled the skies like locusts. No missiles could break through their defenses. No railguns could penetrate their shields. The eclipse might have been a weapon of pure destruction, but the Krieg flotilla was a weapon of purpose. They didn't come to crush, they came to eradicate. And it wasn't just Earth they sought to erase. It was the very idea of humanity itself. Chloe stood at the edge of the war room, watching the stars swirl above them on the screen. Earth's last defense hung in the balance, her mind racing with strategies that all seemed to end in failure. The Krieg flotilla was too strong. The eclipse, though crippled, still loomed as an overwhelming presence. And now, the fleet had arrived. "It's not enough," Carla said, her voice small in the wake of the fear that seemed to fill the room. "No," Chloe said, turning slowly toward her. "It's never been enough." But there was no giving up. There could never be. Chloe knew that. The people here, the ones who had survived the vortex, the eclipse, and everything else, were not willing to accept defeat. They had been pushed to the edge, yes, but what the Krieg flotilla did not understand, what the invaders would never grasp, was that humanity was born from struggle. We don't fall, we rise. A plan was formed, as desperate as it was. They would make one last assault, not on the Krieg flotilla directly. That was impossible. But they would strike at the very thing that gave the fleet its strength, the Central Command ship. If they could cripple it, sever the head of the snake, the rest of the fleet might scatter, break apart. But it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't even going to be possible. But they had no other choice. There were no more moves left on the board. This was their last card. As the resistance rallied for the mission, Chloe found herself in the hangar, watching the last few fighters prepare for launch. The ship was called the Prometheus, a vessel cobbled together from old technology, alien scraps, and the sweat of Earth's survivors. It was their best chance to infiltrate the Krieg flotilla's flagship. Arkady, as always, was leading the charge. "Ready for this?" Chloe asked, watching him adjust his suit. "It's not about being ready," Arkady replied, the corners of his mouth twitching in a grim smile. "It's about doing it anyway." The Prometheus launched into the atmosphere with the roar of 1,000 souls behind it. The sky shimmered with fire as it broke through the atmosphere, its sleek form cutting through the clouds like a knife through the air. Every fighter that followed behind it was just as determined. They were solidified by the knowledge that they would not leave this place without one last fight. They had one mission, one chance. The journey to the Krieg flotilla's command ship felt like eternity. Every second was a drumbeat of tension, each one pushing them closer to their inevitable end. But in their hearts, they carried something stronger than the fear that gnawed at them: hope. When they finally breached the outer defenses of the flagship, it was chaos. Missiles exploded in the distance. Fighters screamed past, their engines blazing like comets. The Krieg flotilla's forces responded with everything they had, unleashing volleys of gunfire and blasts of energy that shook the very fabric of space. And then, the first of the bombers took a hit. "We lost Bravo Squadron," a voice shouted across the comms. "Keep moving." Arkady snapped, his voice like steel. "We go in now." Chloe and her team followed him in. Their ship flew low, weaving through debris, dodging laser fire, until they reached the command ship's outer hull. The ship was an unholy mix of organic and mechanical. Alien symbols ran like veins across its surface, glowing in sickly hues. It wasn't a ship. It was a creature. The Prometheus clung to the side of the vessel as the team prepared to board. The comms crackled with static. "This is it," Chloe muttered to herself. "We either make it count, or we don't make it out." She could hear Arcady's voice through the earpiece, steady and calm. "We do it together. No one left behind." They boarded the alien flagship, weapons raised, and began their march through the belly of the beast. The corridors were vast, too vast for any human to have ever conceived. The walls pulsed with a grotesque rhythm, and the air was thick with the stench of death. But there was no time to be afraid. There was no room for doubt. It was kill or be killed, and the survivors of Earth had learned how to fight. The enemy didn't hesitate. The moment they stepped into the command room, the battle began. Alien warriors, more monstrous than anything they had seen before, rushed at them with weapons that buzzed with the energy of 1,000 storms. Their claws slashed through the air, their eyes burning with the fire of a dying empire. Chloe fired first, her rifle thundering through the silence. But the sound was quickly drowned out by the screams of the battlefield. Arcady was there, too, fighting side by side with her. Each blow they struck a testament to the resilience of their race. They fought like animals, brutal, primal, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. They reached the central core, the heart of the Krieg flotilla's power. Chloe knew this was it. There was no turning back. With one final push, they planted the charges and set the timer. The air hummed with an ominous energy as they turned to make their escape. 1 minute, Arcady said, his face grim. But they didn't run. Not yet, because the world was about to change. The last moments were like a dream. The charge detonated with a sound that shook the universe. The command ship exploded in a blaze of brilliant light, sending shockwaves across space. For a moment, everything was lost in the fire. And then, the Krieg flotilla began to scatter. Humanity had done it. They had shattered the heart of the enemy's power. But it had come at a cost. The fight was far from over. But in that moment, they had proven something. They had proven that, no matter what came next, humanity would never stop fighting. They would rise, again and again. There are moments in history that redefine everything. Moments that rip away the veil of normalcy, exposing humanity to its most primal instinct, survival. But it's not survival alone that defines us. It's the will to fight when the world seems to offer only ashes. The drive to push forward, knowing full well that every step might be your last. For Earth, those moments were now. The Krieg flotilla had been shattered, its flagship destroyed, its fleet scattering into the void. But for all their triumph, for all the hope that surged through the survivors' veins, there was a harsh truth that could no longer be ignored. Victory had come with a cost, a terrible cost. When the last of the alien warships had fled, Earth's atmosphere was left with nothing but silence. The kind of silence that presses on your chest, heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that made you wonder if the world had truly won or if it was merely a brief reprieve before the inevitable. The planet was broken. The cities lay in ruins. The people were scarred, not just in body, but in spirit. And yet, despite all of this, humanity stood. Chloe Voss stood in the war room, her gaze fixed on the horizon, the burning wreckage of the alien ships still visible in the sky. The fight was over, but she couldn't feel relief. Not yet, not when so much had been lost. The faces of the fallen still haunted her, their voices echoing in the empty spaces of her mind. Arcady, Carla, so many others who had fought by her side. They had paid the price for this moment, this fragile, uncertain victory. "It's over," Carla's voice, now just a memory, whispered in her mind. "No," Chloe replied quietly. "It's not." The war was far from done. The Krieg flotilla's leaders were still out there. The enemy was not a single fleet. It was a force, a philosophy, a belief that Earth and its people were nothing more than prey. The Kriegs had already shown that they could rise again from the ashes of their defeat, and Earth wasn't the only world they had their sights set on. The eclipse was a testament to that, a weapon built not to conquer, but to erase. And if that was their goal, if their power could be rebuilt, then humanity's victory meant nothing. For all the victories, there was no escaping the truth. There was always something worse. It was then that the first warning came. A faint signal from the edges of the solar system, picked up by the few remaining satellites humanity had left. It wasn't much, just a ripple, a flicker, barely noticeable. But Chloe knew what it meant. They had felt this before, that unmistakable presence in the stars. More ships, more Krieg flotilla. The survivors gathered quickly. The small, battered council that had become Earth's final hope now had a choice. They could stay on the ground, rebuild, and wait for the next attack. Or they could take the fight back to the stars. The room filled with hushed voices. People argued. Some wanted peace. Some wanted revenge. But Chloe knew what had to be done. There was no question anymore. The Kriegs had to be stopped, not just at Earth's doorstep, but at the very core of their empire. "We have no choice," Chloe said, her voice low but steady, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders like a mountain. "We don't stop now. We go after them, and we end this." The mission was clear: launch a counterattack deep into the heart of the Krieg's empire. The goal was simple: destroy the remaining warlords, eliminate their command, and send a message. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Chloe knew the risks. She knew the cost. But for the first time in her life, she didn't hesitate. There was no room for fear, no time for second-guessing. The Kriegs were coming, and humanity needed to be ready. The fleet that gathered to carry out the assault was unlike anything Earth had ever mustered. A patchwork of survivors, salvaged technology, and desperate soldiers, all unified by one purpose: to strike first. The battle began on a cold, alien world, a barren planet at the edge of the Krieg's territory, one they had used as a staging ground for their final push against Earth. The terrain was desolate, nothing but craters and jagged mountains, where the remnants of the warlords' fleets were waiting. Chloe's ship, the Prometheus, led the charge. It cut through the atmosphere like a spear, the air crackling with the static of imminent war. Behind them, the rest of Earth's fleet followed in a blaze of light, a ragtag armada that spoke not of military precision, but of human defiance. They had no illusions. This wouldn't be easy, but they had no choice. They had come this far. They would not fall back. The first wave of fire hit the battlefield. Missiles streaked across the sky, and explosions shattered the silence. The Krieg's ships were massive, incomprehensible in their scale, but they were not invincible. Humanity had learned to fight in ways the Kriegs had never expected. The air filled with the roar of battle, the sound of weaponry that was both familiar and foreign to the ears of the soldiers. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest as the Prometheus veered left, dodging a barrage of energy blasts from one of the Krieg's dreadnoughts. She felt the pulse of the ship's engines, the rhythmic hum of a vessel that had been built by hands that had known loss and rage. "Lock on," she ordered, her voice cutting through the comms like a blade. The response was immediate. A crackling explosion lit up the darkness. The first Krieg dreadnought was down, but there was no time for celebration. The Kriegs were relentless. As they broke through the outer defenses, Chloe's team pushed deeper into the heart of the Krieg's fleet. The Prometheus darted through debris, each turn a heartbeat, each second stretching into infinity. The battle unfolded like a nightmare. Ships were torn apart, soldiers fell, but there was something in the air now, something unmistakable. Humanity had broken the first line. They had cracked the Krieg's defenses. Then, a new ship emerged, a monster of dark, twisted steel that dwarfed everything around it. It was the size of a continent, its hull covered in jagged spikes and alien symbols that pulsed with an eerie light. "That's the command ship," Carla's voice echoed through the comms, strained but resolute. "We hit that. We end it all." Chloe's heart stopped. This was it. Everyone focus fire on the command ship. Now, the final charge was a frenzy. Fighters from all over Earth's fleet launched their final attack, every ship pouring every last ounce of firepower into the massive alien ship. Chloe's pulse raced as she felt the impact of the ship's cannon blasts shaking the very bones of the Prometheus. "We're taking it down. Together," Chloe muttered under her breath. Her hands gripped the controls, her eyes locked on the target ahead. She could almost see it. The end. The final push. The reckoning of the human race. A final, Ear-splitting roar filled the air as Earth's forces concentrated everything on the Krieg command ship. The energy blast that hit it tore through its hull like a knife through paper. Then, an explosion of light so brilliant, so all-encompassing, it seemed to burn away the very fabric of space. For a heartbeat, the universe seemed to hold its breath. When the light finally dimmed, the Krieg flotilla was no more. Earth had done it. The Kriegs had been defeated. But at what cost? The survivors returned to Earth, battered and broken, their hearts heavy with the weight of what had been lost. They had won, yes, but in the quiet that followed the storm, they knew that the scars would never fade. For as long as humanity stood, they would remember the cost of their defiance. They would remember the price of survival. And they would remember that it was not the weapons that had won the day, but the strength of their human hearts. There are moments in history where time seems to stretch into infinity, where the weight of the past lingers in the air, thick and suffocating, pressing down with the burden of everything that has been lost. And then there are moments when time shifts, when the horizon clears and you realize, with a shuddering breath, that you've made it through. But even then, in the calm after the storm, there is something else that remains. The reckoning. Earth had won. Against all odds, against all expectations, humanity had emerged from the ashes of battle, breathing, bleeding, but standing tall. The Kriegs were gone. The eclipse was no more. The fleets had scattered to the winds, their forces shattered. The remaining alien invaders limped back into the void, nursing wounds they had never imagined a species like Earth could inflict. But victory, as Chloe Voss had learned, is never simple. It's never clean, and it was never free. The battle had ended. The fires that had once raged across the sky had dimmed. The city streets, littered with broken glass and scorched earth, were eerily quiet. Humanity had reclaimed the world, but the echoes of the destruction still clung to the air like smoke. People walked through the ruins in silence, not knowing if they were breathing the air of a rebirth or the ghosts of those they had lost. Faces, once familiar, had been forever changed. The soil of Earth had been scarred by war, and its people, too, had been marked. Chloe stood in the heart of the capital, a city that had once been vibrant with life. Now, it was quiet, almost haunting. The towering skyscrapers, once symbols of progress, were now skeletal remains of the world before the war. The streets were filled with the broken remnants of human civilization. But there was something more. Something in the way the survivors walked, shoulders bowed, but eyes forward. The battle was over, but the war for their humanity had only just begun. In the aftermath, Chloe had tried to rest, tried to allow herself the time to breathe, to take in the weight of their victory. But that peace never came. Every corner of the earth was a reminder of what they had lost, what they had sacrificed, and what remained to be done. The voices of the fallen haunted her, the faces of those who had never seen this day, this victory. How do we go on from here? Carla had asked, her voice raw and heavy. We've won, but it doesn't feel like victory, does it? No, it didn't. There was no glory in the aftermath of war. No banners flying, no celebrations. Only the quiet hum of survival, the uneasy silence that followed the storm. But there was something else, too. There was a fire in humanity, a fire that, even after everything, had refused to die. The people who had stood up against the invasion, the resistance fighters, the civilians, the soldiers, they hadn't just fought for survival. They had fought for something more. They had fought for the future. Chloe walked through the streets with a steady pace, her eyes scanning the horizon. The world had changed. It had been forged in the fires of war, tempered by the blood of the fallen. But it wasn't done yet. Earth was broken, yes, but it was not beyond repair. In the distance, a figure stood on the edge of a hill, looking out at the city. It was Arcady. His face was gaunt, the lines of battle etched into his features, but there was no mistaking the glint of something more in his eyes. Hope. The war is over, Chloe said as she approached him. Is it really? Arcady replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The fight, it never ends, Chloe. It just changes. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. He was right. The war for survival might have been won, But the war for humanity's place in the universe was just beginning. The galaxy was still out there, vast and unknown. The Kriegs had been driven away, but the universe had a way of remembering. Chloe knew that one day, someone else would come, someone more dangerous, more ruthless than the Kriegs. They would test Earth again, but this time, Earth would be ready. The Phoenix Initiative had done what it was born to do. It had united the survivors of Earth, a ragtag army of humanity's last hope, and led them to victory. But now, Chloe realized, it was no longer about just fighting for survival. It was about building, rebuilding what had been lost, yes, but also reshaping a future that could never forget the cost of its survival. Chloe stood in front of the remnants of the government building, its facade crumbling from the weight of destruction, but within, the light of a new era flickered. There would be no easy answers, no swift restoration. The work ahead would take years, decades, but there was one thing Chloe knew for certain. Humanity would rebuild. The Phoenix Initiative, now more than a resistance, had become the foundation of a new world. A world not built on the ashes of destruction, but on the strength of humanity's spirit, a spirit that refused to be broken. Later that evening, as the sky turned from gray to black, speckled with the light of distant stars, Chloe stood alone, watching the firelight flicker in the distance. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, but this time, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of victory, but the peace of knowing that humanity was strong enough to face whatever came next. "You know, we could have been beaten," Carla said, standing beside her. "We almost were, but we're still here. Because we're human," Chloe replied, her voice strong, unwavering. "And we never stop fighting." And that was the truth. Humanity never stops fighting. The stars above were distant, cold, but for the first time in a long time, they no longer felt like a void, but a future waiting to be written. A future that would be written by them.